The Gemara now on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis asks a kasha on the Reish of the Mishnah. Amalei Ravina L'Rava, Hainu Regel, Hainu Behema. Why did the Mishnah feel compelled to tell us a second time that not only is a Regel Mu'edis L'Shaber B'derech Hilucha, but even a Behema is Mu'edis L'Halech K'darka L'Shaber? It's all one and the same. A Behema, no less than a Regel, is Mu'edis L'Shaber Ragleo Derech Hilucha. Amalei, Rava says to Ravina, Tana Avos U'Ktani told us. The Mishnah wants to first set up the Ikar Chiyuv, which is the Av, and then tell us the Toldos, meaning Regel Mu'edis L'Shaber B'derech Hilucha, that's the Ikar Din Regel, that destroys Kelim B'derech Hilucha, and that's the Av. And therefore it's Mu'ad, it's Kedarke, it's Orche, and it pays Nezek Sholem. When the Mishnah adds Behema Mu'edis L'Halach K'derech L'Shaber, that's Derech Hilucha, Begufa or Besara or Bemasli or Lea, etc., etc. And all in those cases, the Bailam Achai Midin Tolda Shel Regel. And even in the case of a Tolda Shel Regel, the Mishnah wants to teach us, there is a din of Muad Mitchilasa to pay Nezek Sholem. So again, it's not that the animal breaks something as it walks because it stomps on it with its reglayim, but rather there are things that are part of the animal's body or that are on the body, and those things break kelim as it walks. So Ravina comes back and he asks the following kasha on Rava's answer. Ela meyata, according to you, that the Mishnah is talking about the Av and then the Tolda is Seifa. Let's look at the Seifa. Now the Seifa is not here on our Yud Zayin, but rather Lahalon later on Daf Yud Tes Amud Beis. The Ketoni Hashem Mu'edes, HaBehema Mu'edes. Is my Ovus my told us Ika. In the case of Shein, how come the Mishnah again adds that repeat Bava, that repeat section of HaBehema Mu'edes, that just like Shein is Mu'edes, so to Behema in general is Mu'edes to eat Peros, Yerokos, whatever it is. Here you cannot interpret it that the Shein Mu'edis is the Av Hamasik and the Behema Mu'edis is the Tolda of Shein, because what are Avos and what are Toldos? In any case, it's Shein itself. It's not a Tolda of Shein. So any animal that eats Peros and Yerokos, that's the Av of Shein. And Rava responded to Ravina with a joke. In other words, I explained one Mishnah, meaning the Mishnah that talks about Regel. Now it's your turn to explain the second Mishnah. You take a Mishnah, and that's the later Mishnah on your test, which is talking about the laws of Shein. The time of my. So really, what is the answer to Ravina's question? What did Rava have in mind? Omar Rav Ashi Tana Shein de Chaya Uktani Shein de Behema. The Mishnah opens up with Shein Mu'edis Lechos Haroylo. That's Shein of Chaya. And if it eats and it was mazik, the Bailam have to pay Nezek Shalom because of Shein. Then the Mishnah continues, Behema Mu'edis Lechol Peros Yerokos, to teach us the chiyuv of Shein of a Behema. And Chaya Behema fall under two different categories. Like, for example, just to give one example amongst many, a Chaya cannot be domesticated. A Behema could be domesticated. So therefore, the Mishnah says, Behema Mu'edis Lechol Peros Yerokos, to teach us that when a behema eats peros and yerokos, we machayev the baila mishum shein. But chaya, if it would eat peros and yerokos, that would be mishuna. Ein darko lechol basar. Chaya only eats meat, like a lion which pounces and eats the meat. And we're going to see this later on at Daf Yud Tes Amud Beis, that it's not the derech, the normal way of a chaya to eat bread or a tavshil or anything like that. Now, why did the Mishnah find it necessary to teach this din of Shena Behema and not suffice with Shena of Chaya? Salkadak, I would have thought Veshilach es beiro ksiv. And the pasuk here is talking about the chi of Shein as beiro. Now, beiro is behema. Behema in if you're mitargim beira, the targum is behema. Now we would have a hamin that since the pasuk is describing a behema, maybe behema in chayalo, maybe in a chayav. In this case, shein of a chayav, only for a behema. Kamash malon, the Tana wants to teach us the chayav bechal behema, that a chayav is also included in behema. And this is a klal that we derive from a pasuk in Dvarim Yudalid. In Parsha it says, "Zos habehema asher tochlu, ayal v'tzvi v'yachmor." So it starts. The pasuk starts with Zos behema, and then it enumerates chayos, ayal, tzvi v'yachmor. So we see that chaya is included under behema. But what about ophos? Where are ophos included? Our Mishnah says that even the Tarnagolim are mu'adim lahalak kedarka l'shaver and lechad midin rega. But it says be'ira, and be'ira is a reference to behema, and chay is b'chlal behema, but of is not b'chlal behema. So how can you be chayiv on ophos midin shein when they're not included under be'ira? And therefore Tosas says that we should learn that chaya and of are considered part of behema, and that's based on Xeris Shava from Shabbos. Because with regard to Shein V'Regel, it says be'ira, which is behema, and in Shabbos it says behemtecha, right? That you're chayav in Shvisas behemtecha. And just like in Shabbos, we say lav dafka behema, even chayav of are included, and that's Gemara later on in Daf Nun Daled. So hu adin, the same applies to shein v'regel, that an oaf is included under be'ira, has the same din as a behema, like it does with regard to Shvisa Shabbos. Ihachi frekti Gemara. If shein of behema is explicit in the pasuk be'ira, and shein achaya is only derived from a drasha, hami ba'aleila misnei bereisha, the Tana should have listed first the din of shein in behema, and only then go on to tell me the chaya has the same din. But in the Mishnah it says it just in the reverse order, because we're saying that shein in the Reisha is chaya, and then Hashem muedes lechol as haroy, behema muedes lechol peres v'yirakos is referring to behema, which is not the derivative, but the explicit case in the Torah. And the Gemara answers, we've seen this many times in Shasad, the asyo le midrash chavirale. Whatever is derived by a drasha is more chaviv in the eyes of the Tana, and therefore the Tana would be makdim the din of chaya first, because chaya is derived with the drasha that hachaya b'chlal behema yehachi frekti gemara reisha nami. So why not be consistent? And in the case of the reisha of regel, lisnei ahi delo ksiva bereisha, it should have listed first that din that's not explicit in the Torah, but rather is derived from a drasha of Torah Shabbal Peh. It should have started with habehema mu'eres lahalach kedarka l'shaber, which means cases of toldos, which are, the animal was mazik with its seor or with a masa and so forth and so on, and then go on to the regel that's explicit in the Torah. And the Gemara answers hachi hashta hasam idi ve'idi avosninu. Whether it's shein of chaya or shein of behema, he's always chaya mishum the avamazik, and therefore hachti also le midrasha chavivale he will first mention chaya, which is derived by a drasha. But hach, in the case of regel, shavik av etani tolda, would he start with the tolda before the av? Iboy same another answer. Id the solik me regel posap regel. In the last Mishnah, in the first parak on Daf Tezvav Amid Beis, the Mishnah is talking about her regel mu'edes, and therefore in our Mishnah he opens up with that which he completes in the last Mishnah, Ketzad her regel. Tana Rabbana, we learned in a Brisa that which we learned in the Mishnah. Behema mu'edes lahalak darkel shabe Ketzad behema nitzolachatza nizak vizika begufa derech hilucha ubesara derech hilucha beukov. In all of these cases, the violent pay mishalim nezik sholet, because these are all toldos of regel. And just like a regel is considered urche, it's a zeko motzui, it's not kavanos lahazik, so too in all these cases, where in the chotzer and nizak, the animal, by virtue of the fact that it was carrying something with parts of the body, or like the seir, or the saddle on top of it, or the masa that was on top of it, or for example the resa and the machzom shabafia, and all these cases, this is considered urche, and he pays nezik sholim. But sumchus omer tzroros v'chazir shahayanover b'ashpa v'hizik mishalim nezik sholim. Sumchus never accepted the halach l'Moshe Sinai regarding chatzi nezik tzroros, and therefore Sumchus is going to tell us that not only do you pay nezik sholem from the get-go in the case of regel and toldus of regel, but even in the case of tzroros, when the animal shoots out pebbles and they destroy. Or, for example, in the case of a chazir that is machatet b'chotmo, the ashpa, and then it shoots out something from the ashpa, and the bailam pei nezik sholim. Gemara raises the following question: Hizik pshita. Are you talking about a case where the chazir damaged something to gufo? In other words, maybe there was something of value in the ashpa, and as a result of what's called the nevira, the nover, the ashpa, destroyed something and pays nezik sholim. That's pshita, that's gufo. Ela ema hitis vehizik mishalim nezik sholim. That we have to change the gears to the brisa a little bit, and that's how we interpret the brisa. Chazir shayanover ba'ashpa vehitis tzoros vehizik is according to sumchus mishalim nezik sholim, even though it's tzoros. So the Gemara comes back and asks another kashoros mandikoshmaye. Who mentioned anything about tzroros? The whole discussion of sumchus is to argue against the Tanakam with regard to tzroros, holding that you pay nezik sholim. But there's no allusion whatsoever in this brisa to tzroros. And the Gemara answers, we have to add a sentence into the brisa of al-chiktani. This is what it should say. Tzroros ki or chayu. When the animal was walking, kedarka, and it was metis sroros v'zika, even though it's darka b'kach, nevertheless the bailim only pay chatzi nezek, and that's halacha Moshe Sinai, that if the nezek was not through gufo but through kocha, then you only pay chatzi nezek, and therefore v'chazir shayadnover be'ashpa v'hitis v'hizik mishalim chatzi nezek. That's another case of tzoros. It's not clear why the brisa felt compelled to mention tzroros with regard to the chazir. It seems, but again, this doesn't really stem with Rashi, but I'll just mention in passing that there are other Rishonim that understood that chazir is really a told of shame, because it was nover bi'ashpa for its own hana, and that's really shame. and then it shoots out something from the Navira, and it pays Chatzi Nezek Midin Tzroros, but it's really Tzroros of Shane and not Tzroros of Regel. And that's why he mentions Ashpa here as a separate category. But as I said before, Rashi doesn't learn like that. But Rabbanu, we learned to the Brisa, Tarnagolin, Shayu Mafrichin, Mimakom Lamakom. The Tarnagolim sort of like fly a little bit in the air from one place to the other. V'shibru Kelem B'kanfeim, and as they flap their wings, they broke utensils. Mishalim Nezik Shalim. This is Regel. This is something that you can anticipate normal, in the normal behavior pattern of a Tarnagolim. However, Shivru Kel Beruach Shebekanfeim. What happens if they blew air and the air caused Kalim to fall and break? This is already not Gufo, but rather Kolcho. Is Mishalim Chatzi Nezek. This is the din of Tzoros and Simchus Omer Nezek Sholem, because Simchus is consistently aligned with his shita that the din of Tzoros has the regular din of Regel and it pays Nezek Sholem. Tanya Idach, we learned in a different price. Tarnagolim Shayu Mehatzim. Matzim, as we said before, means they dance up and down. Al Gabi Isav, Al Gabi Peros, Vitinfu, O Nikru, Behem, Mishalim Nezek Sholem. Once again, this is a case of Nizke Regel, because the Tarnagolis is going up and down on an Isa, it ruins, it makes the Isa unedible, or Peros, and even Nikru Behem, so you pay Nezek Sholem. But Helu Afar Tzroros, if as they were jumping on the ground, these roosters would set into motion Afar or Tzroros, that's already Kolcho and not Gufo, is Mishalim Chatzi Nezek Simchus Omer Nezek Sholem. Tanya Idach, another brisa, Tarnagol Shoyim Mafriach. It was like flying from Makom LeMakom. Yatsa Ruach Mitakas Knov V'Shibus HaKelim Mishalim Chatzi Nezek. And now we have a price again that seems to identify Tzroros as Chatzi Nezek, is Stomach Rabbana. This price represents the Shit L'Chacham that Tzroros, which is Kolcho, is the Bailam only pay Chatzi Nezek. Omar Rava Bishlem Sumchus K'Sover Kolcho K'Gufo Dami. I understand the Shita Sumchus very well, that if he teases Tzroros, then we have a principle of Kolcho K'Gufo. And if the animal damaged through Kolcho, then it's as if he had damaged through Gufo, and therefore he should be paying Nezek Sholem. Elo l'Rabbanon. But according to the Shita of the Chachamim, will hold that Tzroros only generates a chiyuv of Chatzi Nezek. I don't get it. I ki Gufo dami. If they hold like Sumchus, that Nezek of Kolcho is like Nezek of Gufo is Kulei Nezek by Shlame, then Sumchus is certainly correct. But Ilavke Gufo Dami is Chatzi Nezek Nami Lo Shalem. Maybe they shouldn't be chayiv at all because Kolcho is Lavke Gufo. So it's not as if the animal did a damage. Gufo Dami, and really the Chacham agreed to the very fundamental principle of Sumchus that Kolchos Gufo and the behemoth should be paying Nezek Sholem. But Chatzi Nezek Tzoros Hilchsog the Mirali. We have Halacha Moshe Sinai that in the case of Tzoros, the Torah says you're potter for Chatzi Nezek, you only pay Chatzi Nezek. Now, the Rishonim want to know, why is it that the Gemara understood that according to Rava, the Chacham agreed to that principle called Kolcho Kegufo, and therefore Meikar Din, they should be paying Nezek Sholem. Just that the Torah reduced the Chiyuv by half. Why not say the exact opposite? That Kolcho Lav Kegufo, Meikar Din, he shouldn't be paying anything, but the Halacha Moshe Sinai was Mechadish that he pays half. And the answer to the Rishonim is that we have a general rule that Halacha Moshe Sinai is coming legroa v'lo lahosif. And this is based on a Gemara in Sukkah Davav Amid Beis. I thought of a different answer, that the Gemara wanted to avoid possibly coming to the conclusion that Chatzi Nezek of Tzoros is only a knas, like we saw according to one Madiyam and Palgan and Izka in Keren of Tam, Omar Rava, Kol shebezav tomei b'nezikin mishalim nezik sholim. If a zav touches something that's tahar, then he's mitameid. But that's only if the zav has a direct contact with something that's tahar. And that's a parallel of nezik sholim in regel of nezikin. That the bailam pay nezik sholim, he didn't regel, just as a zav was no get to a tar, the animal was mazika begufa. But chol shebezav tar, if let's say a zav would send something flying to something else, that something else remains tar, is nezikin mishalim chatzi nezik. And that's because kocha velo gufa is tzoros, and the bailam only pay chatzi nezek according to the sheet of Chachamim, and the halacha Moshe Misini chatzi nezek tzoros. The Rava tzoros asal ashmeina? Question mark. Does Rava come to teach me the din of chatzi nezek tzoros? That din was already taught in our Mishnah. The Gemara says, "Lo Rava egla mosheches bekaron kamashmalan." Okay, so here we have to know a little bit more about zav. If a zav, this is called medrus hazav, if a zav is sitting on a carriage and the carriage stomps on top of vessels, those vessels become tameim midin medrus hazav, tumas medrus. And trying to remember exactly what the source for Medrus Hazav was. I'm not finding it right this second. In any event, in a similar way, Rava says that if you have an egla moshaches bekaron, which means there's a new din over here, that the karon was tied to an egla, and mashchaso b'derech hiluchal gabi kelim v'nishberu, the bailam will pay nezik sholim in regel, and this is not considered tzroros. And Tanya Kavosei de Rava, we have a support to Rava from a brayso, behema muedes l'shavra b'derech hilucha ketzad, behema shenichnas ol lechatzar hanizak v'izika begufa v'derech hilucha b'sara derech hilucha be'ukaf she'ol leha u'b'shlif, which is a masa she'ol leha b'frumbia, which is the muzzle shebefia, ubezog, which is the bell shebetzavar that's hanging around her neck, v'chamor b'maso, because of the burden on its back. And now here's the punchline: egla mosheches bekaron al gabi kelim vishibrasam. So this egla is dragging a carriage that stomps on kelim and mishalim nezik sholim, because it told us of regel. So we see in this price like Rava that egla mosheches bekaron al gabi kelim vishibrason is nezik sholim. It's not called tzroros because the zav is metame b'din medrus. Tana Rabbanan Tarnagolim shoyu machatetim bechevel. The Tarnagolim were now pecking away at a rope which was tied to a deli, and as a result of pecking away, nifsak hachevel, the chevel split. The nishbar deli, and the deli goes down to the ground and breaks. Mishalmim nezek sholim. Why? Because first of all, it's orche, it's derech tarnagol naker, and not only that, the shviras hadeli is not considered like nizkei tzroros. And the Gemara later on Daf Yud Ches is going to try to explain why this isn't considered nizkei tzroros. I mean, after all, the Tarnagolos did not come in direct contact with the deli. It only split the chevel that tied the deli, and by splitting and severing the chevel, now the deli was broken. That's not direct hazard. Boy, Rava. Darsa al kli velo shavarto. The animal stumbled on part of a kli and did not break the kli, but nisgalgel, the kli started rolling, and then it broke in a different place. Ma'u. How do we deal with that case? Bosa, this is one of the most famous Gemaras in Masechet Bava Kamma, probably in Shas even. Bosa beikaras linan v'gufe hero bosa odil bosa tvar monos linan utzroros ninu. Shall we judge this case by the tchilas hamaisa? That's called meikara, the beginning of the action when it was dores on the kli begufa, which means that this is regel, and the bailam should pay nezek shalom. Or instead of meikara, we should say tvar monas lina. Let's look at the final breakage, the final damage, not the beginning of the tchilas hamaisa of drisa. And therefore, if we look at the shas shviras hakli, at that moment in time, the kli did not break as a result of the gufa behema, but rather mikocha. And therefore, it should be tzoros, and you only pay chatzi nezek. Now, again, if you would have asked me, I would have said that in this case, certainly, may karaz lina, because the behemoth was dores on the kli, and it rolled and it broke. So I mean, there was a direct contact between the animal and the kli that broke. But the Gemara thinks that since it didn't break immediately in that place, but in some other place, therefore maybe we wouldn't say bosam karas lina. Tifshot le mi the rabba the Omer rabba zora kli mirosha glagad uba acheru shvaro b'makeh. We see that we accept the principle of basar meikaraz lina. Immediately when he threw the kli from the top of the roof, it was destined to hit the bottom of the floor and break. So that when somebody comes along and takes a makil and smacks the kli, he can't be chayv. Only the zorik is chayv, because the kli is considered basar meikar as if it's already broken from the moment that it was chucked off, thrown off the top of the god. And if we give it a din of shavur, then he broke a kli that's the guy in the bottom who hit the kli before it hit the ground. It's not kol hakodim zacha. He already broke a broken kli. And the Gemara says, "La Rabba pshita le Rava mi boile." Even though Rabba understood as a davar posh that basar meikaraz linan, and therefore we can derive the conclusion according to Rabba that in our case of dar sabem ala kliva nishbar, if after a certain period of time it was considered as if it was broken immediately when the behemoth was dars on the kli, but Rava was mistapit. Tashma. The Gemara now wants to be poshet the suffix of Rava. Hidus. We have a brisa of hidus. And the animal, the tarnagoles, in this case, was mahades on a kli. According to one opinion, in this brisa, eino muot. What does that mean, eino muot? Yeshom arez muot. Frak the Gemara, hidus salkedaita. Can you really interpret this Gemara this brisa literally? That the animal was dancing on the kli and he broke the kli, and the bailam don't pay nezek shalem. It's not muad. How could that be? Elalav, we have no choice but to reinterpret the brisa of hidus vehitis. Just like we did, you remember back in the case of Chazir, we added something to the brisa that it was hidus vehitis, or there was menakir vehitis. Here also, we're going to say that the animal, the tarnagolis, was dancing on the kli, and then it created through its koach a netiza, and the kli shot out and broke. Ubaha kamifli, and now we understand the machlokes, the Tanakama and the Yesh Omer. Demar Sover, according to the first Tan of this price of basar meikaraz linan. I'm sorry. Demar Sover, I said the Tanakama, I meant to say the Yesh Omer. Demar Sover, according to the Yesh Omer, basar meikaraz linan, which means that this is muad because it's considered as if the tarnagolis broke the kli immediately from the beginning. So from the time that Misha shehitis hatargos hakli. It's considered as if the kli is broken. So there's an immediate, direct breakage of the kli on the part of the tarnagos. That's called meikara azlinon. And that's why you pay nezek shalom. It's not kolcho, but it's gufo. So this is not a case of tzroros, according to Yeshua Marsav, the Tanna Kamma holds basa tvar mona azlinon. Let's look at the moment in which the kli was broken, the shviras hakli. And at that moment in time, the Tarnagolos was not being dores on the kli begufo, and therefore it's not in this case regel of gufo for nezek shalom, but rather it's in this case tzroros. In any event, it comes out that Rava's suffix is really a machlokes, two opinions of the Tanoim and of Brisa. Lo, the Gemara rejects it. And the Gemara says this Brisa is not talking about a case of hitis, hatarnagolos sakli, but rather, Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, hitis, tzroros, we're plugged to the sumchas rabbonika miflagi. This Brisa is explicitly talking about a case of tzroros. That was the case in the Brisa. Right? It was hitis tzroros ala kli, and the tzroros destroyed the kli, and that's the old machlokas between the Tanna Kamma and Sumchus about whether chatzi nezek tzroros, and that's the Tanna Kamma's opinion, or nezek sholem because of kocho kigufo. Okay, then, so here's where we're going to stop for today on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph. Thank you so much.